This essay discusses mental health themes and offers a critical interpretation of the Batman without diminishing its artistic achievements. The views expressed reflect solely the author's perspective and are not intended to invalidate other interpretations.
Yeah, how come this stuff doesn't look more like...
Nicer? Less ridiculous?
No, but I mean... Like, look at this. It's like Batman stuff, but... Like if he had ADHD or something? Batman's a fascist!
Despite its critical acclaim and technical brilliance, something about Matt Reeves' The Batman left me deeply unsettled. I couldn't quite put my finger on what bothered me about this latest incarnation of the Dark Knight until I came across a particular scene in Sean Murphy's Batman White Knight, a moment where the Caped Crusader is caught on camera brutally force-feeding pills to the Joker. This scene crystallized issues I'd been grappling with about realistic Batman portrayals, how our power fantasies crumble when exposed to harsh reality, and what the continued acceptance of this wealthy vigilante says about our society. I'll admit I love Batman. I grew up with Tim Burton's gothic take on the character, and to me, it was perfect for what it was, a dark fantasy about a mysterious hero fighting larger-than-life villains. But watching Matt Reeves' The Batman in 2022, I began realizing something that made me fall out of grace with the character. The more realistic Batman becomes, the harder it gets to ignore some uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, boy.
To understand how we arrived here, we must trace the cinematic Batman's evolution through different eras, each reflecting its time's anxiety and values. In the 1940s, Batman emerged as a wealthy detective who worked alongside police, mirroring post-war America's trust in institutions. The 1960s Adam West version embraced camp and optimism.
Batman? Yes, Mr. Wayne.
Frank Miller's 1980s interpretation turned Batman into a gritty badass, capturing Reagan-era anxieties about urban decay. My personal favorite, Tim Burton's gothic romantic hero of the early 90s, gave way to Joel Schumacher's colorful spectacle.
Never leave the cave without him.
Before Christopher Nolan redefined the character as a pragmatic anti-hero whose extra-legal methods reflected post-9/11 debates about security versus civil liberties. Despite these surface transformations, the Batman character has remained remarkably static. Just a guy using violence and advanced technology to fight crime, funded by an enormous inherited wealth. What has evolved is our understanding of the Bruce Wayne character. Early comics presented him as a simple playboy philanthropist who was friends with the police, and he remained somewhat superficial until Nolan's Batman Begins revolutionized the character by crafting a psychologically complex figure who, despite his trauma, maintained human connections and displayed emotional intelligence.
Nice car. You should see my other one.
His Bruce Wayne could navigate social situations, crack jokes, form relationships, and separate his vigilante persona from his civilian life, suggesting a level of mental stability that made his crime-fighting choices seem measured and deliberate. This sophisticated portrayal created a challenge for subsequent interpretations. Zack Snyder's darker, more isolated version struggled to find depth beyond its brooding exterior.
Why did you say that name?
Then came Reeves' interpretation, a Bruce Wayne so consumed by his mission that he bears an unsettling resemblance to another famous comic book character, Rorschach from Watchmen.
Thursday, October 31st.
Rorschach's journal, October 12th. Fear is a tool. This city's afraid of me.
The parallel between Reeves' Bruce Wayne and Rorschach extends beyond their shared taste for grim worldviews and dramatic journal writing. Both characters operate from a place of profound psychological disturbance, seriously viewing themselves as society's last line of defense against moral decay. But while Rorschach's limited means make vigilantism his only perceived option, Bruce Wayne's vast resources make his choice of violence more troubling. Consider the concrete costs of Batman's methods. By his own admission, after 2 years of violent vigilantism, crime rates in Gotham are actually increasing.
Murder, robberies, assault. 2 years later, they're all up.
The police department diverts substantial resources to either pursue or cooperate with him. All of these officers could be out policing the streets. His violent interrogations and evidence-gathering methods would very likely compromise legal cases against criminals. This raises another fundamental contradiction in Reeves' film. Batman supposedly operates at the margins of the law to fight corruption within the police force.
What was he afraid of? You?
What'd you say?
Yet his methods, assault, property destruction, evidence tampering, could only go unpunished with the tacit approval of those same corrupt authorities.
He interfered in an active hostage situation. You could be an accessory to murder. Right, now I got you on assaulting an officer.
Just give me a minute, I'll get him to cooperate.
Okay, give him the room.
Get out! Get out!
The film never addresses this paradox. How can Batman be both a crusader against police corruption and a vigilante whose illegal activities are overlooked by that same corrupt system?
You really okay with this? What about chain of evidence?
He's wearing gloves.
Wayne Enterprises, meanwhile, neglects its potential for systemic change while functioning primarily as Batman's personal armory. Consider another billionaire hero, Tony Stark. Both Wayne and Stark inherit vast industrial empires, but their responses to societal problems diverge dramatically. When confronted with his weapons impact, Stark fundamentally transforms his company's mission, developing clean energy and funding global initiatives.
I am shutting down the weapons manufacturer division.
Is he perfect? No, he's still a jerk, but the point is he demonstrates growth and systemic thinking.
I had become part of a system that is comfortable with zero accountability.
When Bruce says he doesn't have time for his company, which very likely employs thousands of Gotham citizens,
I ain't got time for this.
the film briefly acknowledges this as irresponsible, but it never explores the real implications. How many Gotham citizens depend on Wayne Enterprises for their livelihoods? What opportunities for economic development and job creation are being squandered? What happens to all those workers and their families when their CEO prioritizes his nighttime vigilantism over the company's stability? There's another layer of irony here that needs unpacking. In recent years, Batman stories across comics, games, and films have made conscious efforts to move away from their problematic history of villainizing mental illness. Yet Reeves' realistic approach gives us a Bruce Wayne who displays clear and realistic signs of severe mental health issues like paranoia, emotional instability, and dissociative tendencies. The film's voice-over narration, with its disturbing references to choosing targets and memory gaps, reads less like a hero's journal and more like evidence for psychiatric evaluation. Here's where things get even more interesting.
That's interesting.
It often feels like Reeves himself sees these problems. Throughout the film, he introduces rational people who point out how absurd this all is.
Living in some tower over the park, looking down on everyone with all that money.
When Lieutenant Martinez questions why they're letting a masked vigilante contaminate crime scenes, he's treated like a bureaucratic obstacle. When Selina Kyle points out Bruce's privilege, the story quickly moves on. Even the Penguin points out Batman's incompetence as a detective.
World's greatest detectives! Am I the only one here knows the difference between hell and law?
But the most telling evidence comes from the Riddler. He is so convinced of Batman's psychological instability that he builds his entire plan around their supposed kinship.
You inspired me.
The Riddler genuinely believes Batman shares his deranged worldview, that they're both damaged souls delivering violent vengeance to a corrupt city. And here's the uncomfortable part. Based on what we've seen of this Bruce Wayne's behavior and thought processes, can we really say the Riddler is entirely wrong? The obsessive journaling, the disconnection from reality, and the conviction that violence is the only answer to societal decay. This creates a fascinating paradox. The film's antagonist might be the only character who truly sees Batman for what he is, not because he's particularly insightful, but because he recognizes the familiar patterns of his own mental instability. Yet, the movie, bound by the constraints of what a Batman story should be, must ultimately dismiss this reading, even as it continues to provide evidence for it. This tension between acknowledgement and avoidance becomes most apparent in the film's final act. The movie tries to convince us that Batman undergoes a profound transformation, evolving from a symbol of fear to a beacon of hope. On paper, this could have been a moment to address all these contradictions, his mental state, his methods, his privilege. Instead, it becomes perhaps the clearest example of how constrained these stories are by franchise expectations. The supposed transformation is essentially a rebranding exercise. Batman doesn't actually question his methods or privilege. Instead, he just reframes his violence as a tool for helping rather than terrorizing. It's like a corporate PR campaign. Same product, new marketing angle. His savior complex, if anything, becomes more entrenched. Now he's not just protecting Gotham through fear, he's appointed himself as its inspirational leader. The underlying assumption that a billionaire in a bat costume shouldn't be making unilateral decisions about justice and social order remains completely unchallenged. This resolution perfectly encapsulates the paradox at the heart of modern Batman stories, and, in my view, Reeves seems perfectly aware of all these issues. He raises them explicitly throughout the film, I can see that, but he can't actually address them without dismantling the entire fantasy. The franchise demands a hero, even if that hero's behavior raises more questions than it answers. The Nolan trilogy came closest to examining these issues in mainstream film, particularly in The Dark Knight, where Batman accepts blame for Harvey Dent's crimes. However, this sacrifice ultimately reinforces rather than questions his heroic status. He is choosing to take the blame, therefore noble even in disgrace. What's missing is a genuine reckoning with the implications of a billionaire choosing violence as his primary tool for social change. The comics have been more willing to confront these uncomfortable truths. Going back to White Knight, Batman's methods are genuinely questioned. The story concludes with Batman coming to terms with the consequences of his actions and being willing to start from scratch, earning trust by revealing his true identity. Beyond White Knight, works like War on Crime and Kings of Fear forced Batman to confront the psychological and societal costs of his crusade. Although none of these stories are part of DC canon, they suggest a possible future for the character, one where Batman must face real accountability and adapt to a world increasingly aware of power dynamics and privilege. Listen, I'm not naive. I'm fully aware this approach might seem radical for mainstream films, where audiences expect the escapist fantasy of an uncompromised hero. But in an era of growing awareness and anxieties about rising authoritarianism and wealth inequality, I worry that perhaps we need a Batman who challenges rather than reinforces our assumptions about power and justice. While I prefer the more mythical, unrealistic Batman, if the way forward is to truly embrace realism, it should be done fully and honestly. A truly realistic Batman could explore how Batman's interference compromises Gotham's legal system, or highlight the escalating arms race between Batman and Gotham's criminals, showing how his presence inadvertently puts civilians in greater danger. Or we could see the tragic irony of a man so focused on punching criminals that he misses how his neglected company's layoffs and failed community programs are creating more desperate people turning to crime. Today, as wealthy individuals position themselves as humanity's saviors through private space programs, experimental cities, and social media platforms, we need stories that examine rather than celebrate this dynamic. The most relevant Batman for our times might be one who makes us uncomfortable not through gothic aesthetics or brutal violence, but by holding a mirror to our willingness to entrust social justice to the whims of the wealthy. The Dark Knight we need isn't one who makes us feel safe in the hands of powerful protectors, but one who prompts us to question why we would look for them for salvation at all. Thank you for watching all the way through. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to click subscribe and like, and see you next time.